I am a graphic designer and illustrator. I graduated from Sac State in 2006. I was one of the first people to go through the cohort program. Prior to 2006, it did not exist. Um, and from 2008 to 2018, I was a full-time independent freelance designer. In 2018, I cut back to part-time and I took a full-time creative position at VSP in Rancho Cordova, which is, it's like a vision company that we design eyewear and sell eye insurance, kind of like a competitor to Warby Parker, but not as exciting. Um, so I was invited to come talk to you guys about sharing some of my experiences and what I've learned. So I hope that this is beneficial to you guys. So being a freelancer is like being an iceberg. And what do I mean by that? Think of being a freelancer or independent designer as an iceberg. On the surface, you're a designer, but beneath the surface, you also need to be a creative director, selling the client on your ideas, managing their feedback, directing other designers when needed. Like if you have like if the client has like a team of creatives and you're overseeing the project, you sometimes need to manage that. A production designer, communicating with vendors and printers, setting up your files and artwork for print, web, and video. Oops. Project manager, tracking multiple projects and their timelines and their budgets and making sure everything is running smoothly and delivered on time. You're also a marketer, promoting yourself and finding new work. You're an account manager responsible for communicating with those clients once you get them and building and maintaining those relationships. And lastly, you're also an accountant and a bookkeeper. You have to track your income, track your invoices, and make sure that they're getting paid on time. You're managing a business bank account as well as doing taxes. As a designer, or students, most of you guys should know at least to some degree what these three roles entail. When you're working as a freelancer or a contract designer for an already established agency or studio, this is usually what you only need to focus on. And that's one route that you can take. But for me, when I started realizing that I wanted to be more independent and I wanted to manage my own client base, I realized these were the areas that I was really lacking in and I needed to grow my skill set. And I recognize that this is not the most exciting part of the job, but honestly, if you guys have a basic working knowledge of these areas, it's going to really set you apart from other freelancers in the field and really set you up for success. So let's jump right in. As I mentioned, a project manager is making sure everything in your work queue is running smoothly and on time and on budget. And to do that, whenever I have a new client or a large scale project, in this example, this is taken from a website project I did for the city. I'm building these proposals that incorporate a project timeline, a project estimate, how much I'm charging for the job, and the payment schedule, how we're setting up deadlines for when invoices are being paid. I start usually in my presentations with a project timeline, and I'm breaking the timeline into phases to kind of pace things out. I'm stating how long each phase roughly estimated is going to take, the projected deadline for when those phases are going to wrap up, and a layout of milestones and important dates for each phase to their completion date. And this can run the gambit of including important meetings, when proofs are due, when I need final copy or images from a client. In the case of this project being a website, I'm laying out in phase 2, I need everything by a certain date before I move into development. And then in phase 3, we're in beta and alpha testing, and then leading up to site training and launch. Next in the presentation deck is my estimate, and I'm reiterating at the top right here the services that we're covering in this project, just so everything is clear. I'm explaining what the deliverable is and kind of what's included in that. Not everybody will send out an itemized deduction of kind of what the price is entailing, but I've found it's kind of helpful to kind of show what's going into a price, and people don't necessarily get as big a sticker shock when they see the estimate. And then the total cost of all of your itemized pieces. In this instance, there's only one, so that's why it has the same total. But some projects will have like 3 or 4 deliverables, like if it's like a branding project. I also include this disclaimer at the bottom of my estimates that specify what services are included and are not included, like what I offer, how long the estimate is valid for, in this instance, 60 days. And at the top right there, I'm noting that any amount of work that takes place outside of what we've established is going to be billed to them at an hourly rate. So this kind of helps keep the project on rails instead of additional stuff being tacked on. At the end of the proposal deck, I'm laying out a payment structure. I usually coincide when invoices are due with each phase. So this kind of helps the client not be stuck with a giant bill at the end of a project. And it's also ensuring that over the lifespan of the project, this project, I believe, was a couple months, I'm getting paid throughout those couple months and not just waiting for one big check to come. I'm also including 2 more disclaimers outlining that clients are responsible for giving me any changes and feedback through email or in an annotated PDF, never over the phone. I don't want to risk miscommunicating and not hearing something correctly, as well as placing the responsibility for all final approvals on the client end. I'm absolutely doing my best to make sure that feedback is implemented and everything is good to go before a site goes live or a project goes to print, but mistakes happen. So I include this clause just to set the client up as that last line of defense instead of myself. So they understand that if something happens, ultimately that responsibility was on them and not me. On the back end, what the clients are not seeing is I have a spreadsheet that is tracking all of my active work. I have a job number to kind of, for my own file management system, the title of the job, the stage that a project is in, whether or not it's started or in progress or at print, the current stage that a project is in and when that's due, when the overall due date for a job is due, the hours in a budget of any given stage, the total hours of the overall project, and how much I have spent in the current time budget. I also have a little piece in this Excel sheet that's tracking job leads, follow-up emails that I have sent, if I have an upcoming meeting with a new prospective client, just so I have like a really scannable top-level view of what's on my plate at any given time. Any questions before we move on to the next section? Yes. Mm-hmm. I will get to that. Anyone else? No, okay. On the next section. Okay, marketing. Working for yourself, again, means that you need to find your own clients, and most importantly, you need to promote yourself. When I first started, I found I didn't have any contacts, and I found the majority of my work on Craigslist. I would search for terms like freelance or telecommute, graphic designer, illustration. I would look in the art, media, and design sections, the web and info design sections, food, beverage, hospitality. I'd search in Sacramento markets and Bay Area, San Francisco markets, and I would just email anybody that fit those search term criteria. They didn't always pan out, but a lot of the time I was able to find pretty consistent work, and doing this a couple times a week really provided an avenue for consistent opportunities for new work. I don't know how credible Craigslist is in 2024. I don't use it anymore. But you could try out services like ZipRecruiter or LinkedIn, and try a similar search tactic and see what comes up for you. But most importantly, is being able to promote yourself and be able to talk about yourself. And I have never been good about that, especially as a very introverted, anxious person. I believe that if I just did good work, the work would sell itself and the work would just roll in. And to an extent, there is some truth to that, but initially clients still need to know that you exist and where to find you. So to do that, for me, it really just came down to being comfortable with myself and striking up conversations with people and taking an interest in their lives. These wine bottles, I met the owner of this winery one night when I was having dinner at Aioli, which is a restaurant in Midtown. I was just sitting at the bar, drinking and having a bite, and it was before dinner service, so the restaurant was still pretty empty. And there was a guy sitting at the other end of the bar, and since we were really the only two people in there, we just kind of struck up a conversation and talked about our lives. He lived in Hawaii and came to California a few times a year, and turned out that he owned this winery in Plymouth. And, we talked about what I did and that I struck out on my own and was an independent designer. And he had such an enjoyable conversation. He, like, before we parted ways and I was settling up my bill, he's like, I think I have some projects coming down the pipeline that might be a good fit for you. So, like, why don't we exchange business information and I'll be in touch. And sure enough, within a few days, he contacted me and we kicked off this project, which was a series of, I think they're 350 milliliter wine bottles. So they're like smaller wine bottles for his wine club at his winery. So it really just goes to show you that you never know where work will come from, as you just have to be willing to take a risk and strike up a conversation with somebody and just be open to where a conversation might take you. Another great approach is just to work closely with the clients that you do have. Treat them as partners rather than a potential obstruction to making good work. Like, they have just as much stake in this as you do. And if you treat them with respect and that they have value and a knowledge base that you as a designer don't have. I don't know anything about wine, but he did. And we were able to kind of share our knowledge base to arrive at this solution. Treating them with respect is going to go so much further than just trying to get a project like Instagram shareable. Like, because if they have a positive experience, they're going to tell other people about that positive experience. And work is just going to start coming from those referrals. And sure enough, after a couple of years, I didn't need to dig around on Craigslist anymore. My established work and the clients that I had worked with were just feeding off of their own momentum, and all of my work was just coming through referrals. Having a presence on social is really important, sharing your work and, most importantly, your process. Like, this is a pretty picture, obviously, but I think the story behind it and the research and the iterations that led to the solution are almost just as interesting of a story as the final product. And people are going to really gravitate towards that, especially in an age where everything is so polished and finished. It's nice to kind of see the messy backstory of what led to something. Engage with profiles and clients that you're interested in and strike up like an actual meaningful relationship. Just don't hit the like button, like actually get into their comment section and try to strike up a conversation. You could set up paid promotions with your posts and target demographics and businesses that are of interest to you, that they might find this type of work interesting. and shoot to like European areas that may not see your work on a regular basis. Any questions here before we move on? No questions. Okay. Do you have one, Alicia? No? Okay. Okay. You sure? Okay. Next, being an account manager. So in marketing, you are establishing those relationships and starting those relationships. In account management, you are keeping those relationships and you are growing those relationships. Over the course of your career as not only just a general designer, but as a freelancer, you are going to be working with people from all walks of life. You're going to be working with people that have years of experience working with creatives and absolutely understand the process and will give you what you need and then stay out of your way to just trust you to do the job that you're hired to do. But you're also going to be working with people that have no idea what a designer does or even what the creative process looks like. They just want their dream to kind of become a reality. They want to start their small business and they just want a solid brand to get them off the ground. And it's our job as designers to help them achieve that goal, whether it's what they know what their problem is. You know, seasoned people may come in, be like, this is my problem, this is what I have, this is what I need to be solved. Or they may not have any idea what they want. They may think that they know what they want. And then through talking with them and having a meeting, you'll realize what they want isn't necessarily what they need. And that's our job to ask those questions and dig up those answers. Because we are just as much on the hook for their success as we are for our own success. I don't use this tool that often, but I have a questionnaire that is sometimes helpful in these situations for people who don't know what they want. It's really helpful. I'll either send it to them ahead of time and they can fill this questionnaire out on their own, and then we can set up our kickoff meeting and go over the answers. Or if they want to have a longer format meeting, we can go over it together and just have a conversation and kind of work through this and figure it out. But, you know, it's really important just generally to ask them, what does your business do? What problem are you solving for your clients? Who are the decision makers? Like, you may be meeting with someone who is actually a representative for a larger collective or a board. And it's good to know that information up front if you're going to be dealing with a committee of people giving you feedback or just one person, and learning how to navigate multiple sources of feedback and people's opinions. Another great tactic is asking for descriptive words or phrases to describe their brand, their business, their clients. That gives you a really good starting point for when you're doing your brainstorming to just kind of kick things into gear. But overall, your ideal goal should be to establish a relationship and keep that relationship and retain them for existing work. Because if you have a client that is coming back to you over and over again, you are establishing a stable source of income. This is also beneficial to not just us, the designers, but to the client, because the client is getting a designer that understands how they think, understands how they work, and we are able to work faster and more efficiently because we have a working relationship now. It's also great because we as creatives, we can offer them strategic continuity to their brands and a stewardship to how a brand evolves over time. And what might start out as a really small project that you think may be a one and done can evolve into something completely different. For me, with Camellia Coffee, when Ryan and Rob approached me, their initial ask was just to do a logo and 3 labels for their house coffees. They were a couple of guys that just really enjoyed coffee and didn't want to be viewed as snobs or to take themselves too seriously. They just wanted to serve good coffee to people. So we kind of jumped off of that, and I said, well, why don't we work on that and take a risk and really kind of embrace this idea of not taking ourselves seriously in the brand. no one else in Sacramento is doing this right now with coffee. Let's treat our coffee labels like beer labels and just fill it with whimsical, fun illustrations, bright poppy colors, and really set ourselves apart from the rest of the coffee culture in Sacramento. And it was such a hit. They loved it so much that those initial 3 bags have turned into, gosh, at least 50 over the 5 years that I have been working with them. I have done clothing, I've done merch drops, I've done custom packaging in these small batch coffee tubes. I've done pop-ups for them with this ice cream truck for our street. I did a mural for them in their new cafe. And all of this sprouted from that initial ask. And because I treated that project like it was the most important project that I had, and gave them the best possible solution that I could give them, it evolved into a 5-year and ongoing relationship. Any questions here before we move on? Yes.
So you said you started off with just a photo and labels. How did this continued partnership appear in like the contract? Did you have to make another contract for set and deliverables, or was it something with current contract?
We kind of just set this up as like an ongoing retainer. So the initial rate that I billed them at, I dropped it to a smaller rate because I was expecting ongoing work. And we kind of have like a set hour allowance that is inside of that. And I've known them for so long. Normally, what you would do is if you exceed that allotted budget, then you would reevaluate that, saying like, hey, I've noticed a reoccurring pattern here. We're constantly going over. Maybe we need to renegotiate what our retainer fee looks like, or you could just slap them with, hey, we keep going over. I'm going to charge you full price if we don't pull this back. But really, it just kind of comes back to how you want to manage that relationship. Like if the client is super important to you, and you really value the relationship, then act accordingly. If they're a pain in the butt and you really want them to stop abusing your time, then slap them with that higher fee. So and just be like, guys, you got to respect this. If we keep going over, this is what's going to happen. So we have 2 options. We can renegotiate, or I'm going to keep hitting you with a higher fee if you keep going over. And usually they will do either renegotiate it, or they'll be like, okay, fine, we'll pull back on the work. It really just kind of depends on what you want to do. There's not necessarily one clear answer. It's all based on your relationships and your current workload and how much you are willing to give and take.
You see that you're approaching the hour mark that you use for the time frame. Before you finish line?
If you are given a workload for that month and like, I don't know, a week or 2 into the month, you're seeing like, oh man, this work is going to blow this budget, then have that conversation with them. Maybe it's just a one-time thing and these are really important projects that need to get done, or maybe they're just being abusive and they're just trying to take advantage of a lower rate. But yeah, always be upfront, always communicate, tell them well enough ahead of time that they can evaluate that, because maybe this big project that's eating up the budget isn't that important and it can wait, or it could be broken up over more than 1 month. Always give them the opportunity to kind of respond back instead of like, uh-oh, I went over, give me more money. Anyone else? All right. Last one. Save the most fun for the last. So when I started out, and I had like all these, not a ton of invoices, but I had more invoices coming in than I could keep track of. And I had income coming in from multiple clients and multiple sources. I realized that I needed a system in place to follow up on these invoices, to track them, to make sure that they're being paid on time, as well as setting up taxes and doing record keeping and bookkeeping. But before all that, to Alicia's original question, I needed to know what I was charging. Because before that, I just thought I could charge whatever I want based on what I thought that I was worth. And there is a truth to that. Like you should be charging based on what you feel your time is worth, but respectively to your experience level. When I initially started out, I was almost 2 years out of school. I had spent less than 2 years working for a studio. And my first client, one of my first clients, he was a friend of mine, not a super close friend, but like we knew each other outside of work. I told him I'm charging $50 an hour. And he laughed at me and he's like, I'm not paying you $50 an hour. Like you are 24 years old. Like you are just starting out. I know that you're just starting out. Like you need to like reevaluate that. And that was embarrassing, but he was right because essentially, even though I owned my own business and I was self-employed, I still only had the experience level of a junior designer. So I had to adjust my rate accordingly. And for the next few years, I charged between 30 to 35 an hour. And then as I got tired of taking on small work that I took on a lot of work to meet my profit margins, and I wanted to stop doing that, I started to raise my rate to kind of filter out those clients and bring in bigger fish. And what was super helpful to me was this book, Talent is Not Enough. And in it, one of the many things that it teaches you is how to build a pricing structure for your freelance rates. And it gives you this really simple equation of setting up your expenses, like your personal expenses of how much you pay for rent, how much you pay for insurance, your food and clothing, your bills, as well as your business expenses, how much you're spending on advertising and marketing, subscriptions like Adobe, or if you have like any stock photo subscriptions or like AstroPad or any other service that is a subscription, your office supplies, your internet, if you're renting an office space, essentially anything you need to do your job and to live. You add all of that up, that is your expenses for what you need to be making a month to live. And then you divide that by your billable hours or what you could actually, like the actual hours that you are working to charge your client. In a given year with 52 weeks and 40 hours a day, or 40 hours a week, excuse me, you're looking at about 2,080 hours, but realistically, you're not working 100% of the time, nor should you be. You're going to burn yourself out. I was very bad about this in the early stages of my career. I was working seriously 16-hour days. It was not a healthy place to be. So what you should be doing is you should be looking at 50 to 80% of your time is actually billable hours. Minus, you're giving yourself 3 weeks for vacation. You're giving yourself sick leave, public holidays if you want to take those, and what you're spending devoted towards marketing and picking up new clients. So that leaves you with about 53% of that initial total hours. So 1,116 actual hours that you are sitting at your desk working. So you're going to divide your total expenses by what your billable hours are, and that's going to give you your break-even rate. And that's just to survive. Obviously, you want to be making a little more money than that. So you're going to take that total and mark it up 10 to 20%, and that's going to be your profit margin. So now you're breaking even and you're making money. It's also important to look to what other industries are doing in the Bay and San Francisco. If you have friends that are working at agencies, and they're comfortable talking about their salaries, ask them like, hey, what are you making? And you can kind of measure what you're charging against that. Another great book is the Handbook for Pricing and Ethical Guidelines. This book gives you breakdowns of industries like photography, commercial illustration, design, creative director, and gives you kind of like an average of what these types of professions are making in the country. So that also kind of helps you as a benchmark of like, here's what this type of profession is making. Where do I stack up against that? But again, if any of you are freelancing currently or are planning to right after school, you should be looking at charging roughly 35 to 40 an hour as a junior designer. And then maybe after a year, depending on how much work you're bringing in, reevaluate that. If you're getting way too much work and you're tired of it, raise your rate. Experiment. Like, don't just raise it flat across the board. Like, try it out with a new client and see if they balk and freak out. If they don't, cool, you got away with it. Try it on the next client and see if they're okay with that. Kind of just feel it out and just don't just jump into a whole new price range, and you might choke off revenue that you already had established. I'm sure none of you were expecting this many spreadsheets and numbers in a design talk, but this is kind of an example of what I am doing for my bookkeeping, what I'm tracking over the course of a year. I have this set up as a Google Excel sheet. So I have tabs of, gosh, when did I move it to Google spreadsheets? I think in 2010 I did. So I have basically 14 years of financials that I can look back on, so I can track how am I doing year over year? Am I doing better? Am I doing worse? What needs to change? Obviously, COVID took a big dip there. But I have the year broken into fiscal quarters, and then the quarters are broken into 3-month chunks. And then I'm tracking the income that's coming. Essentially, each cell is a separate invoice. So I can easily just have a scannable look of like what's coming in, how many invoices are coming in. And then I have this to compare to a billing software called Billings. And I send my invoices out of that, and that sends me reminders if an invoice is 30, 60 days overdue and I need to follow up with the client saying, hey, what's going on? I'm also tracking how much I'm taking out for taxes. I take a third out of every check that I get and I put it into savings, and I just pretend that money does not exist. And this was honestly the most important piece of advice I was ever given. And it wasn't even a designer. I was working for a stationery company when I first started out as like a part-time job. And she was self-employed. She owned the shop, and she's like, always, third of your paycheck goes into savings to cover taxes and business expenses, unforeseen expenses that might be coming down the pipeline that you don't know. I have a friend, when she first started freelancing, I mentioned this, and she's like, heck no, man. Why am I going to take money out when I can just spend a $2,000 check? Like, look at how much more money that is. And I was like, all right, if you want to do that. And then tax season came around, and she was on the hook for a $10,000 bill that she did not have money saved for. Granted, the third is usually more than it needs to be, but I have never had to pay out of pocket, out of my personal finances, for any tax bill for my businesses. And you should keep it that way. Like, you don't want to end up with unforeseen expenses that, like, oh shit, how am I going to pay for this? It's just better to have more than less, because at the end of the tax year, if you have more in there than you planned, you could either leave it alone and just let that savings grow, or you got yourself your return, and then you can upgrade some equipment or invest in a new piece of technology that you have been having your eye on. It's also really important to separate your finances, open up a business savings account, a business checking account. When you get your checks from your clients, deposit them into one of those two accounts, however you want to set it up, everything in savings, and then bring money out, whatever you want to do. But it's just good to have all of your money separate. So when you are asked to go over financial records with your tax person, you have it all nice and organized, and you can just see where your money is going in and where it's going out. As I mentioned, these two books were groundbreaking for me. This is the Pricing and Ethical Guidelines is the 16th edition. This is the 10th edition. They come out with one, I think, every few years. But Talent is Not Enough is fantastic for how to forecast your workload and finances, planning stuff out so you can pace yourself and what to expect over the course of a year. The best way to determine your pricing, marketing and communications, how to get on the right career path. It's great for not just freelancing, but just general career advice. What to do if legal issues come up in your career. And ethical guidelines is great for contract and licensing agreements. There's a whole section in here on mock-up contracts that set up examples. It includes the current pricing, freelance rates, salary by discipline, like I mentioned, illustrator, designer, creative director, art director, it's all in here. And how to price your work to create a sustainable living is also covered in that book. I would say get both of them, but if, you know, they're not super expensive. I think ethical guidelines is, I think like 33 on Amazon, and Talent is Enough was like 45 the last time I checked. But if you're going to get one of these two books, I would say get Talent is Not Enough, because it kind of brushes over what's going on in this one, but not as in depth. That's it. We'll open it up to questions. Anything.
I'm sure you've dealt with bad clients before. How
Mhm.
do you navigate maybe somebody who is unwilling to communicate, unwilling to budge? How do you navigate that as a team?
In terms of, what do you mean by unwilling to budge?
Maybe they're going with arguing for a concept that might not be effective for what they're looking for, but you know, as a designer, that it might be better for their market. Talk about that. How do you, I guess, apply your design knowledge? How do you communicate that?
Sure. Well, this is the business side of things. You could put your best foot forward. You could say like, this is the right direction to go in. And just like you do in your critique classes, like kind of like walk them through it. I think I mentioned in marketing, like you just need to get really comfortable with talking about your work and yourself and in a conversational way, not as you're talking amongst other design students who have the insider knowledge. You have to present it in a way that somebody who doesn't know can understand. A lot of the times you're not going to get the solution that you want to go with, and that's what happens. For every project that is in my portfolio, there's probably 20 or 30 projects that will never see the light of day, and that's absolutely fine because it paid my bills. And the client in the end got what they wanted because they were happy with it. What was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. I would say, oh yeah, never include anything in your presented concepts that you are not 100% in justifying moving forward, because clients, I do not know what it is, have the uncanny ability to always pick the one I really hope that they didn't pick that one. So just don't include that concept. Like if it ends up being two concepts, that's okay. I do try to deliver at least 3 concepts for everything that I make. With Camellia, I just do a one and done. I'm like, here, this is what you guys are getting. And we are on such a tight relationship now. They're like, cool, yeah, we'll move forward with that. That also comes with building a relationship, like building that trust. Like if you trust them, they will probably trust you, and they will just leave you alone to do your job. But you have to build that relationship to get to that point. So it's okay if they pick the bad one, you still get paid. Just don't put it in your portfolio. Anyone else? Anything.
You said you use billings for all your, but you have a different system for keeping yourself on track, project wise?
Yeah, there's a lot of project management software out there. Billings came out with like a partner piece to it called Daylight, I think, and that's like the project management side. I experimented with it, but it's really for like at least that program specifically was more for like managing a team, like you are a dedicated project manager and you're managing a team of people. Really what I do is with my timelines, I take those important dates and I just put them into my Google Calendar or my iCal, and it's synced across my phone and my laptop. So I know when stuff is coming up. I'll set stuff up for like maybe if it's like in the concepting phase, I'll set up like a week reminder. So I know that I have to be like really on that project and putting more effort into that one. If it's a meeting, it may be like a day or two in advance notice, but like I'm just putting important dates in there, as well as the worksheet that's tracking my jobs and like where due dates are. Um, like I recognize there's probably software out there that is doing all this stuff for you, but I have just been a tactile person and I just really enjoy filling out Excel sheets for some reason.
That a lot of work comes from referrals.
Mhm.
I was curious if those referrals are coming from other clients or
For the most part, they are coming from other clients. So like I did a vintage store in Midtown, and they were friends with Ryan, who owns Camellia, and they referred him to me, and that's how I got connected with Camellia. I have some referrals from designers, like not as much in this these days, but we had like a little network that if we were kind of overburdened, we would pass work around to each other. That's always an option. Like if you have other friends that are freelancing, you could kind of make a de facto studio and you're passing work around to each other. But it really just like I at least for me, I did not bank on uh other creative referrals because we're all out there trying to get that nut, paying the bills, keeping the lights on. Um, but most of it came through other clients. Mhm. Yes.
About, uh, you- where to set up the- and then you get educated on legal aspects of my
It is in there. I have been a sole proprietor my entire career. Um, only because I only use my name as for my business. I don't have a fictitious business name. I don't, the idea of paying an additional fee every year for a fictitious business license, which is basically if you have a name that is not your name, never appealed to me. If you go, I think, one step up above sole proprietor is an LLC. And an LLC does give you more legal protection if you are sued for whatever reason. I have never had a client experience go so bad where I have been in any legal options. But so that's an option for you if you want that legal protection. But with an LLC, you're also paying $800 a year to have that license. So because I am just a cheapo, I stuck with sole proprietor. It is setting you up for the maximum level of risk, but I have not really conducted myself in the gosh 20 plus years I've been doing this that it's never really been a problem. Again, not gonna lie, I really hope that I just didn't jinx myself in saying that. Yeah.
If you were to, let's say, like, start over with square one again, would you do anything differently from what you have done?
Yeah, I would. I would recommend that nobody jump headfirst into freelance. If any of you were here for my last talk in February, when I started freelancing, I was fired from the studio that I was working at, and I had it with studios. I didn't like how at least the two that I worked with. I did not like their business models. I did not like how they treated their employees. I just wanted to strike out on my own. So I had no income, and I lived in a one-bedroom apartment with two other guys. We had bunk beds and a loft bed, and I paid, I think, $200 in rent. And I would not recommend that. You know, I was in my early 20s, so I didn't mind living like a scuzzo. But it was not the most comfortable first few years of my career. I can tell you that much. But you know, at the same time, I guess I do look fondly on it in the sense that we were really tight. You know, I really loved my roommates, and gosh, we didn't have internet. And I was like pirating internet either off of our neighbors, or I was packing up and going to a coffee shop just to like I would have all my emails drafted, and I would go to a coffee shop, I'd buy a coffee, and I would just shoot everything off then. And then I would be on Craigslist looking for new work. So I was really only online maybe once or twice a day. But that's one way to do it. Um, I would suggest that probably a better way to go about is maybe if you have the work-life balance and you are okay with tacking on the extra hours to like maybe moonlight and then transition into a freelance career, like once you feel like you're ready to make the jump, you could also just not take a full-time design job and just get a part-time job for anything. And then the part-time schedule kind of frees you up to work different hours during the day. So there's different options that you can take. It really just kind of depends on the level of comfort and security that you want in your life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What are some of your observations with how, I guess, the freelance culture has shifted? Has it become more accessible? Has it become more saturated? What are some things that you've noticed in terms of starting off as freelance?
That's a great question. Things have been really hard since COVID. And even then, when I made my transition from freelance to part-time freelance, it was right around the Trump election. Everybody was very nervous. I lost probably 3 of my bread and butter clients, like the clients that I had guaranteed income coming in every month. That was basically probably 50% of my monthly income. I lost all 3 of those clients because businesses were downscaling. People weren't really sure the direction that the economy was going, so they were moving things in-house. And then this opportunity at VSP just kind of coincidentally presented itself, so I was able just to kind of hop over and do that. Now, since COVID, I'm fully remote. And again, if you were at my last talk, I do not recommend working. I definitely don't work full-time, 2 jobs. I definitely don't do that. But it does offer you more freedom working from home if a day is slow and you have the day off. But I will say, I think the market has probably gotten more competitive. Sac State and City College just continue to churn out talented people. And a lot of those people choose to stay in Sacramento. And there's only so many seats available at the firms and the studios, and people barely want to take that track. So again, it really comes down to how you market yourself. Like, what are you doing to set yourself apart? Like, you don't have to be cutthroat. You don't have to be like at each other's throats. Like that's Curtis's, I'm not saying that's not Curtis's approach. Curtis's approach is that there's enough at the table for everybody to just do good work. And honestly, that is kind of my philosophy too. Like it is scary. Like when your livelihood is tied to the clients that you are bringing, and you see other studios that are like super exciting and doing good work that are kind of circling industries that you also work in, like it's a scary thing for sure. But you have to trust in your abilities as a designer and as a problem solver. Like I am good at what I do, and I am good at what I do because of this. And if for whatever reason that client leaves, like, and if you leave on good terms, maybe do like an exit interview with them and kind of figure that out. Like what went wrong in our relationship that I can learn from and take that to the next one. Broaden your search, like especially in this remote age. Like we could be pulling clients from all over the world now, and like that's normal now for us to do. It wasn't so normal in the early 2000s. It was hard enough to get sometimes freelance clients in San Francisco or San Jose. But in this day and age, it's probably a lot more common to do that. So while the pool is more competitive, it is also a lot more open to us now. We just have to be willing to take the plunge, I guess, and try it out. Anyone else? Any questions in the chat?
You have a great question. So you mentioned in your speech about social media and how much that is in the freelance. What do you like advise to put on like social media besides like just like do you recommend just finished work, or do you post like the process that went into this project, and do you include that in like a contract with the client, like that allows you to be able to post that verbally tell them?
Unless a client is outright buying the usage rights for your artwork in the sense that you no longer own it, or you have signed an NDA and you're not allowed to share it. Like if you're working for like a tech company, or if you are working for like Disney or something, they'll probably have you sign an NDA that keeps like what you're working on super confidential. That kind of stuff you can't share, but you still own the usage rights to everything that you've done, because they have not necessarily paid to outright own it. Especially like in terms of illustrations. That doesn't mean that you're going to turn around and sell it to another client, but it means that like you are okay to share that. Like if you want to ask them, that's fine to ask them that. But yeah, I will share finished projects. I'll share case studies. I'll do process videos. I just share like a lot of experimentation and illustration stuff that I've just been doodling around with. Like I try, it's hard because like you can tell like when somebody is busy because they just stop posting. So I go through intervals of when I'm posting and when I'm not posting. I try to kind of like backlog posts, so I just have like a batch that I could go to when I do get bogged down. But honestly, I think like the more behind the scenes stuff that you are sharing and you're talking about it and you're being like transparent with like, hey, this is how I problem solve. And this is like, this one didn't make it across the finish line. And here's why. Like, I think if you are showing your failures and showing that like not a perfectly curated experience, I think that makes for a much more interesting brand experience than just perfectly manicured posts. Yes. And just, you don't apologize. That's what we're here for.
Somebody just random said, "Hey, I want to do this for me." How do I know kind of price that?
Sure.
And I know for time to go through this more times, it probably is clear
It does.
that trial and error, but as a new designer, like, how do you estimate the down?
So initially, what you should be doing is looking at how many hours a project is going to take you in those phases, like in research and discovery and iteration and concepting and refinement and delivery. How many hours is that spending over the course of a project? And like when I'm doing that, I'll be like doodling on like a piece of paper, like, oh yeah, I'm going to spend X amount of time concepting, X amount of time on revisions, X amount of time probably communicating with them over email. And then that comes up to like, let's just say 10 hours. So I know that this project is going to cost me, will take about 10 hours to do it. And then you apply your hourly rate to that. In the instance, like, let's say you're charging $30. So then you know that that project is worth $300. Now, another tactic that you do that you just kind of have to feel out is the type of client that you're working for. If you're working for a nonprofit, they probably don't have a lot of money. So $300 might be too much. It might be just the right amount. But if you're working for Facebook, jack up your estimate, like, and maybe charge time and a half to that, because like they know what they're paying their designers and their illustrators. So you should be competing with that. Like, they will probably happily pay you $300, but then you are selling yourself short because that client can shell out more money. And that kind of stuff has gone over in the pricing ethical guidelines, like working on a kind of like, you have your base price, like this is what you need to be making to make a living. And you can be scaling that back based on your profit margin or increasing it depending on the type of work that you're doing. Or like you don't want to be too generous because then you're not making any money. But like if you are choosing to do a work like near pro bono, maybe you just want to break even on it so you can cover your costs, and then you're okay with that at the end of the day because you believe in the project and you know that you're going to get something really interesting out of it. And then you know that other work, which might be less interesting, is going to make up for that because you also have that in your pipeline. At least that's how I've done it. I'm not necessarily saying that that's the right way, but that's how I've handled that in the past. Yes.
So I know that. It's based on like what kind of value this is trying to do, like maybe everything like that. At the same time, it's a good practice to like say, oh, maybe we have like a conversation, but it's okay.
Mhm.
I got something on to do. Or to-
I kind of like tapered off from this, but I would usually build into my estimate X amount of hours, and that was dedicated towards communicating, whether that's phone, email, or meetings. I definitely charge for an in-person meeting because I have to leave my office, I have to drive downtown. I'm taking time out of my day to be with this person, and we're talking one-on-one. So a meeting may take like 2-3 hours round trip before you're back at your desk. So you should be charging for that time. But like if you're just picking up the phone and you're having like a quick touch base, like that initial time that you allotted for in your estimate, that's usually enough to cover that. And you kind of get a feel for that, like as time progresses, like how much time am I usually spending talking to clients, and like how much should I be charging for that? Does that answer that? Okay.
Like, what if what if your clients are people that you know well?
Mhm.
Maybe, rental homes,
Mhm.
where you still charge the same.
Well, like I mentioned in the instance of Camellia, like I charge them a reduced rate. Like I charge them like 30% less than I would charge a new client, just because we've been working together for so long. But yeah, that's the same thing. Like, and whatever you want that like retainer fee, or like maybe you have a production rate. Like if the job is only just like cropping photos, you're probably not going to bill them your creative rate. So you can have different rates that fit different scenarios. You don't need to tell your client that, but you can have different case studies that kind of fit different situations. You can ask us any questions as you want. That's what we're here for. I'm happy to answer them. My pleasure. Thank you. And thank you, everybody on Zoom.
Bye.